We spend our days navigating an unpredictable public world, constantly assessing our surroundings. But the moment we step inside our own house and turn the deadbolt, our brains instinctively drop that defensive posture. We establish a physical barrier, and our mind registers the space as an impenetrable sanctuary. Locking that door acts as a psychological trigger. It signals to our nervous system that the environment is now under our total control, allowing us to stop scanning for threats and finally relax. We rely on that single piece of metal to define the boundary between the dangerous outside and the secure inside. This topographical map illustrates the extreme version of that reliance. It tracks the location of a remote cabin in a Washington state forest, miles from the nearest town. A married couple traveled out into this dense terrain specifically to use the vast physical distance as their primary layer of security. At 11 p.m. on their first night, the absolute silence of the forest was broken. A heavy thump physically shook the structure. As they slowly looked up at the ceiling in the pitch-black darkness, they heard the unmistakable sound of deliberate footsteps walking directly across the roof of their cabin. The couple survived by calling the police and waiting in the dark for nearly an hour until the intruder finally climbed down and vanished into the trees. In that hour, their isolation transformed from a luxury into a liability. The walls they trusted to keep people out had become the boundaries of an inescapable trap, miles away from any hope of immediate help. To understand how these boundaries are breached, we have to look at this blueprint. It highlights the outermost property line, the first zone of physical vulnerability. Home invasions operate on a proximity-based logic, where threats begin by probing and testing this extreme outer edge. A 14-year-old walking alone on a trail in the woods directly behind his parents' house encountered this outer testing phase. About a mile into the walk, he spotted a man in a blue jacket and a red baseball cap, slumped against a tree, seemingly asleep. The teenager tried to quietly pass by, assuming the man was harmlessly resting. But as he stepped within a few feet, the man lifted his head, locked eyes with him, and immediately began to stand up. The teenager broke into a dead sprint, abandoning the trail and jogging frantically back to the house. He hurried inside and locked all the exterior doors, finally placing a physical barrier between himself and the woods. He turned on the television to distract himself. Minutes later, a man's voice echoed from the back door, repeatedly calling out hello. The man in the red cap had tracked him all the way from the woods to his threshold. The teenager froze in his living room as the intruder pressed his face against the glass pane. When calling out failed, the man grabbed the handle and violently forced it back and forth, jolting the deadbolt as he attempted to break through the lock. The man eventually gave up and vanished before police arrived. While the physical door successfully defended the home, the teenager's perception of the property had changed. The woods were no longer a backyard. They were a confirmed path for a predator to follow him to his door. When the outer perimeter fails to deter an intruder, the conflict area rapidly contracts. As we see on this diagram, the red threat highlight moves inward, forcing a direct confrontation at the home's primary physical barrier, the front door. A young man experienced this contraction late one night while sitting alone on his front porch. A large man in a hooded sweatshirt walked down the middle of the street with a rigid, unnatural stiffness. As he reached the front of the house, he stopped and simply stared at the porch in absolute silence. The stranger suddenly turned and marched up the driveway. The victim yelled for him to leave, then retreated inside and locked the front door as the man approached. Through the peephole, he watched the intruder step onto the porch and pull a heavy metal crowbar from beneath his sweatshirt. The victim ran upstairs and locked himself inside a bedroom. As he dialed 911, the sounds of his front door splintering under the force of the crowbar echoed up the stairs. Then a loud thud signaled the door had finally given way, followed by a terrifying silence. He sat in the dark for minutes, listening for footsteps. When the police finally arrived, they rushed the second floor and fired a taser. The intruder wasn't looking for valuables. He had quietly climbed the stairs and was standing perfectly still, right outside the locked bedroom door, waiting for the victim to come out. A violent breach of the front door forces a rapid surrender of the home's interior. The victim is pushed further and further back until the entire house is reduced to the square footage of a single locked bedroom. The final phase of this proximity logic involves parasitic invasions. As this diagram shows, the red highlight now bypasses the exterior boundaries entirely, manifesting deep within the home's most private interior spaces. A 24-year-old woman living in a townhouse woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of a door screeching open downstairs. Assuming it was a close friend who had a spare key, she stepped out of bed and descended the stairs to investigate the noise. As she stepped into the living room, she found a strange, unkempt man in his 50s sitting comfortably on her couch. He was watching her television. He slowly turned toward her, showed a crooked smile, and casually waved his hand, inviting her to come sit next to him. She escaped, but deep infiltration can also remain completely silent. A gamer living in a 4-bedroom house spent weeks hearing muffled knocks and the faint sound of doors closing at the far end of his hallway. He checked his yard and found nothing, so he assumed the noises were just the settling of an old empty house. After a figure finally rushed past his open bedroom door, police searched the property. They discovered that a transient had been secretly living in one of the unused bedrooms for weeks. The intruder had been sleeping and eating just a few feet away, separated from the victim by a single layer of drywall. These stories show that a threat doesn't always have to break in. Sometimes it simply exists alongside you in the dark, inhabiting the same space while you remain completely unaware of the presence on the other side of the wall. In almost all of these cases, there is no clear resolution. The man on the roof, the stalker in the woods, and the stranger on the couch all vanished or refused to speak. Their motives and what they would have done if the victims hadn't reacted remain a permanent mystery. Official responses often downplay the severity of these encounters. When the woman reported the intruder on her couch, police suggested he was likely just a harmless homeless man looking for a place to sleep. They viewed it as a nuisance, overlooking the calculated act of picking a lock and waiting for the resident to wake up. A broken door frame can be repaired in an afternoon, but for the people in these stories, the feeling of safety doesn't return with a new lock. The next time they are home alone and hear a floorboard creak, they can no longer rely on the assumption that they are the only ones inside.